All right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started and invite Terry Budd. Well, I don't know where he is. He's in the building somewhere, but we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 5:05. Today is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. Let's start by indicating who's here with Clark.
Clark Nelson.
Chris Wynn.
Nicole McDermott.
Connie Burgess.
Julie Jackson.
Terry Bodden.
Rich Nye.
Terry, you were behind me. I didn't see you. Sorry about that.
I heard what you said about me.
It's all right. It's all good. And I'm Karen Winder. Welcome to tonight's study session. We're going to begin. We have a couple of items on the consent agenda, and board members have had a chance to review this. So with that, do we have a motion?
Motion to accept the consent agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second on the table to approve the items on the consent agenda. Any further discussion from the board? Questions, concerns? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And we will now pass it on to, are you taking this, Rich?
We'll have Assistant Superintendent Welber.
Good evening, Superintendency and Board of Education. Tonight, it's my privilege to introduce the new principal of Cottonwood High School, Mike Douglas. There he is. Look at what he's sporting tonight, you guys. He's literally dressed in gold and black because he is so excited to be the new principal of Cottonwood High, and we're excited to have him. Let me tell you a little bit about Mike. I'm going to try to do this from memory. Mike was both a teacher and an athletic coach out at Cypress High School. He was a social studies teacher. And then from there, after several years of teaching and coaching, he decided he'd like to venture into administration. He first did his hours to receive his administrative endorsement by doing some hours both at the high school and at the elementary school. And then he took a formal position as an intern out at Jefferson Junior, Kennedy. I don't know why I always confuse those two. Kennedy Junior High, and after interning, he was picked up as an elementary assistant, and he was divided between Fox Hills and Driggs. From there, he actually became the principal of Driggs, and then we stole him into the district office to be one of the elementary directors. So I've had the privilege of working with Mike over the last several years. And he is going to come up and say a few things, but he also has some swag that he wanted to hand out. So we're going to give him a chance to say a few things. And introduce your family. Okay.
Yeah, let's start with the family, least I forget. My wife Lindsay's here tonight. We have Ethan, our oldest, and then William, our second, and Marin. Say hi, Marin. There you go. She's our most outgoing. So I'll be very brief. I just want to say thank you to the board and to the superintendency for this wonderful, amazing opportunity. I'm so excited, beyond excited, to be the next principal at Cottonwood High School. I cannot wait to share with the world what wonderful things we'll be doing there at Cottonwood High. And in that spirit, I brought a little swag. I have for everyone a tumbler, so every time you take a drink of your favorite drink, I want you to think of Cottonwood High School. So I'll pass this out, and that's it. Thank you.
Lindsay and family, we sure appreciate all your support. We know that I told Mike jokingly that his wife better be on board because our high school principals put in like 60 to plus hours a week, and a lot of times they'll kiss the family goodbye on Monday and not see them again until Saturday evening late. But we still appreciate your support, and I'm sure at times they'll be out supporting the Cottonwood Colts. Go Colts. All right.
Can I take back my vote? Can I take back my vote on the consent agenda? Where's my shirt? Where's? Whew, wow. Where's the shirt?
It got delayed in the port with the shipping.
All right, good answer.
Awesome. Thank you and congratulations.
Ooh, you look good.
That's an exciting announcement. We have 8 high schools, and whenever we have a retirement or a vacancy in any sort, there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of worry and stress over who's going to take those reins, because it is a big job, and we know he's up to it. So we appreciate him accepting that position. All right, next on our agenda is an information item, their school land trust report, not school fees yet. So I forget who's doing the school land trust report.
That was just a.
We're not
Okay,
really
very good.
discussing it. It was just, I know
Yeah,
it was included.
there's just a. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Rick's nodding his head behind me. This is just for consent.
Excellent. Then we're going to move on to our only action item of the evening, which is our school fee rules, fee waivers discussion. Because this has a budgetary component to it, this is, we have recommendations coming from our administration, but it is actually voted upon by our board because the budget is under our purview. So with that, we'll turn it over.
Thank you.
Before we do it, I just want to make sure I understand. So tonight, this is like first and final reading, like we're voting for this tonight?
The first reading is always a vote, yes, but
So
it is
this
not
is
a
the-
final action because we will have some time for comment, engage the public on by our proposed fee schedule. So this will be basically our proposed fee schedule by the end of this discussion.
Okay.
And then we'll seek further kind of just feedback and talk to neighbors, and then we'll be able to come back with a final action.
Thanks. Sorry,
Did
I panicked for a minute there
No.
because that's what I was expecting, and I
No.
was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Thank you, Board. We are here to present to you the proposed fee changes, along with inform you of the previous fee law that goes into effect that will affect our fee schedule for this year. Again, it's just a first reading, so at that point, after which you will decide which direction you want to go from there, and then we will have a second reading in the board meeting in April is our plan. You can see that it was probably supposed to be announced that it was Dr. Muse and myself. You probably can't tell, but Mr. Prashant doesn't look exactly like Dr. Muse, and so he is here in his place. Dr. Muse was climbing up a tree last night to help his neighbors prune, and a branch flipped up and hit him in the eye. So he is under recovery right now, and will be back with us soon, but Steve and I plan to do our very best to present this information to you, okay?
Thank you. I'm going to cover the first half of the presentation. This is Garrett was going to cover. And Garrett, as you know, spent a lot of time going through school fees. He has a lot of wealth and knowledge of that. Just want to kind of go through and remind everybody of the new rule on school fees, which is R277407. That was issued on December 11th, 2019, and enforceable on January 1st, 2020. And there's information on that side very quickly, but this kind of goes back to kind of the history of this, going back, yeah, right there. The history of this kind of goes back to that decision. There was actually a permanent injunction made by the Utah State Board of Education in 1994, and kind of as they looked through fees, it became enforced, and it kind of came up again in 2018, and so USBE and the legislature worked through this and came up with this and started requiring the new rules for that. And in that, the purpose of the rule there talks about making a permanent to orderly establishment of the system of reasonable fees, provide adequate notice to students and families of fees and fee waiver requirements, prohibit practices that would exclude those unable to pay for participating in school-sponsored activities, or create a burden on student or families that have a detrimental impact on participation. So we started following this, and that's why they issued these rules, and each school board has to go through and approve fees from there. Okay. And just a couple definitions there at the bottom. Co-curricular activities means an activity or course or program outside the school hours that also includes required regular school day or curriculum. and then extracurricular is any activity or program outside of the regular school day. So a couple of definitions there just to kind of keep in mind as we go through this.
Wait,
Yes.
Oh, I should hold my questions for
Okay, either way.
Council.
All right. Okay. So the fee policy requirements. First, a maximum fee amount must be set by the board for each activity. Okay. Fees for individual classes or activities must be combined or totaled. So those of you who've been on the board for a while, remember there used to be a transportation fee, a participation fee, a spirit pack fee. Those fees have all been combined and it must be lumped into one fee. So if you look at that for any of your extracurricular activities, now it's just listed as one fee for that. A spend plan is required for each fee. So the advisor or the coach for each of those spend plans goes through and lists every detailed item for what those fees would cover. And it must include amounts raised through group fundraising. Voluntary individual fundraising may be offered to students that help them offset their out-of-pocket portion only and is not considered part of the fee, and it cannot be required. It's something that helps bring down the cost of those things. Again, those fundraising is something we do with that. The maximum total aggregate fee amount per student per year must be set by the board. And Craig will present that part of the fee schedule tonight so you can see that each one has a maximum amount they can charge. The amount of the fee may not exceed the actual expense of the activity or class, so we can't be building these war chests, so to speak, the items. We want to keep those within budget so we're not charging more than is necessary. A fee may not be used to supplant or subsidize another fee or fee waiver. So for instance, we may have a teacher who is a painting teacher, but maybe also a ceramics teacher. They can't use the fee from painting to cover the ceramics fee and vice versa. So that fee they charge is for that class and that class on that activity as well. All fees are now waivable. If something is provided, sponsored, or supported by a school, it is a waivable fee. All fees must assure that there is not a disproportionate impacts on schools within district due to fee waivers. So this has kind of been one. We have to look at our district where we have a very east-west boundary. Some of our schools are able to collect a lot more money through payment of basic fees, while a lot of our schools may have a lot of fee waivers. And so that creates a little of an unequal and disproportionate balance. We have to look at that as well. So in the year 2020-21, Granite School District had fees waived of $1,138,000. The Granite School Board of Education reimbursed for 2020-21 the amount of $1,138,000, so everything. And in the last 2 years, Granite School District has covered 100% of waived fees. So it's a big expense right there, $1.1 million. Now, part of this legislation also written in, there was additions to what was passed in 2020, the textbook rule. And textbooks now, or fees for textbooks will be prohibited during the 2020-2023 school year. So starting next school year, we cannot charge for textbooks. Exception for these fees would be textbooks used in AP classes and concurrent enrollment only.
That does include IB.
Thanks, Greg. By definition, a textbook means instructional materials necessary for participation in an activity, course, or program, regardless of the format of the material. And that's a big part right there, regardless of the format. Okay. Textbooks include our hard copy book or printed pages of instructional material, including a consumable workbook, computer hardware, software, or digital content. A textbook does not include instructional equipment or instructional supplies. Furthermore, the definition, as used in this part, instructional materials means textbooks or materials used as or in place of textbooks where they must be used within state curriculum framework for courses of study by students in public schools, including textbooks, workbooks, computer software, online or internet courses, and audio and video media. So that's the definition of our textbooks. It would also include novels in that as well. Okay. So Garrett did a deep dive in this with accounting and looking at what textbooks cost us. There's mainly two main accounts that textbook money comes from. And for the 2020-21 school year, there was expenditures of $409,000 in secondary schools. Now this number is a little bit, we're not sure, there's a little bit of gray area in this just because there's some factors to consider here that we need to look at for your consideration. For instance, for last school year, the lower number of students were face-to-face. As we know, we are all in dual modality. We did not have all of our students come face-to-face, so a lot of students received items through online, through Canvas as well. This also did not include funds expended in non-textbook accounts for items that now qualify as textbook under USB rule. For example, software, sheet music, items of that nature. Other items considered, USB has stated that extracurricular textbooks like expenditures are not bound by the new rule. So extracurriculars are something you'd have to purchase still, that you could still charge for, the board's decision. And some of the funds used to purchase textbooks may have not been from these fee revenues. So they may have come from district allocations, may have come from the school themselves. So with this in mind, Garrett met with accounting again on this, and the total estimate loss to secondary schools is $500,000. So between fee waivers and now the textbook portion, that's about $1.6 million right there between those two. Any questions at this point? Julie, answer anything?
Sorry, I wrote it down. Okay, yeah, so I was trying to remember, do we have a separate budget for these fee waivers? Or where does that come from? I'm trying to remember where I saw that.
Rich and Steve are looking at each other like,
Yes.
who's going to take
Who's
that
gonna
question?
Either one, yeah.
So in terms of budgeting, it has been kind of an ongoing expense and is budgeted out of district funds, just to make sure that we cover those at the school level. So you're really, it's looking at M&O.
So we don't necessarily have like a budget for it. We just kind of take it from wherever we can?
From what I understand, it's come out of M&O.
Maintenance
The fee
and
waiver,
operations.
the last couple of years, the fee waivers come out of M&O.
So we see
M&O.
how much those are and
Maintenance and operation budget, which is by far our largest budget.
Yeah.
We've done that as a district for the last 2 years, the whole cost. Are our plans, do you feel like we can cover that, continue to cover that? Or,
yes.
well, that's a strong yes.
I think that's part of the ongoing discussion tonight, so I don't know if we're better to answer this now. Rich, you can chime in. Or if we get through the proposed budget, the proposed fee schedule. What do you think, Rich?
So I will just answer that $500,000. That's in addition to what we've been doing before, and M&O isn't a bottomless pit in that regard. And so, as we understand this $500,000, if you recall, HB 211 during the legislative session was being ran, and it carried a fiscal note with it to help offset the cost that was going to be incurred for districts, because we knew this was coming, right? And the legislature trying. Anyway, long story short, it's been about 3 years coming. The idea is at this point is we're looking at $500,000 as identifying budgets, but also taking a look at the recent legislative allocation that we're going to receive, where it was 6+% on the WPU, and it'll likely have to come off that because that is an ongoing source.
But the fee bill did not pass, right?
It did not pass. So
Because
we did not,
ultimately,
no.
they didn't put
It
any
went
money
through
in.
many different renditions as first it started, and they thought they were actually part of the start of the session, and it got tabled and revised, and then it did not pass it by the end of the session.
So we didn't get
the
any
price tag around that was
any
about
extra money from
Yeah.
HB 211.
Did they give any reason why?
the initial
they
price tag was
proposed?
around 55 million, correct, Dr. Nye?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was estimated in public ed at PROPS as being probably low. But that, and the state board's working on this, but that was a self-reported number from the districts. Essentially, in terms of what we're collecting, we let them know, but sharpened pencils across the state. It was like, well, that's too low.
So did they give any reason why they took that? Because at first, they were going to give us 55.
Yeah.
So they just don't have the appetite.
Yeah, and there were things in the bill that changed some things with student fees. Some things we supported, some things we didn't, depending on the iteration of the bill as it progressed. I think it just got muddied down and in the end didn't pass. So when it was in committees passed, Senate committee, House Ed committee, or House passed, and then when it hit, after that it was kind of a moot point, so.
I also, Terry, talked to a couple of legislators who supported the bill, but then when the funding was pulled from it, they pulled their support because they didn't want to stick us with something.
Right. So for us, it really is budgeting, and you know, when you approve the budget, the board approves the budget every year. There's not a lot of budgets that aren't encumbered in an ongoing fashion, right? So in terms of looking for those pots of money, it really is one of those mandates that we're going to have to look at a WPU to solve and what our allocation was this last year. But we'll work on that and bring that, of course, as part of the budget discussion to the board.
And that's one of the reasons usually we approve fees in November, December, but we waited for this legislative session thinking this was going to happen, and we were hoping that it was going to change, and it didn't. So we still have the original intent of the bill and the law that we have to follow now. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Craig. Craig is going to talk about the proposed fees for the 2022-23 school year.
So again, this is the first reading. The first set of slides was informational from before to talk about the new fee law that will come into place for this year. I'm here to propose for you the changes or additions to the fee schedule. So this first slide is just showing all three schedules. Of course, it's way too small to see. And so the plan is for me to go through the high school, then the junior high, and then the elementary, but I will blow each one of those up so that they're a little bit easier to visualize. We've also passed around a legend, if you will, that gives you what each color represents. And so I am actually colorblind, so if I happen to make a mistake, please let me know. So we'll start with the proposed high school senior schedule. The very first part in green talks about general, and then that school programs would be deleted. And we want to explain that a little bit. Based on the USPE law and the way the legislature has defined fees, they've set it up into 4 different categories. And they are the general fees, the curricular classroom fees, the co-curricular fees, and the extracurricular fees. And they've identified those and also given codes for accounting to use. So we felt like it was good to mirror what they have defined. And so that's that first section. To speak to the basic fee for just a moment, the basic fee is $65. However, within that basic fee, we estimated that about $10 of that fee was earmarked for textbooks. And because of this new law, we needed to remove that $10 from the basic fee. However, you can see right next to it that graduating student fee, which paid for caps and gowns, we're taking away from students because that is part of the process of going through school. It's sponsored by the school program. So we're taking that money and putting it back in and leaving the basic registration fee at $65 and eliminating the $25. So that's our proposal from the fee committee. Then underneath that, there are school-sponsored admission fees. There's the addition of fundraising. In addition to general fees above, the following fees may be charged for specific events as applicable. That is an informational item, but fundraising is important because each of these items below could be considered a fundraiser, and it depends on how the school sets that up. For example, stomps don't make very much money. However, dances sometimes generate a little bit of funds. The current law was that those funds generated by that dance needed to be spent to maintain that dance only, and they couldn't be used for other things. Yet our student body officers host a homecoming dance, and then they use that funding to be able to support assemblies and different things throughout the year. So in reality, it's a fundraiser. So we added the word fundraiser. Underneath there, though, we did add graduation party. And this is something that you'll have to discuss and decide. The feeling behind the fee committee was that we were too closely connected to this graduation party to be considered as sponsored by an outside entity. It's normally sponsored by PTA. However, at the school level, we provide the police officers, we provide the administration, we set up a lot of the things as far as the venue. It's hosted at the school, and we felt like that was too closely tied. So the decision would be either to add that as a potential fee or separate ourselves even more from this sponsored event by PTA.
I'm kind of the one that this really, when I read this, I was pretty much on the phone with Rich and having a great discussion because, like, my kids, I've volunteered at the Granger graduation party, right? And so whenever you have a senior, they tap into the parents that have seniors and try to run them. And it's, PTA's involved, and it's kind of a grassroots thing. But my philosophy of a grad party is there's a lot of different ways kids can get into trouble on graduation night. And so we want them safe and supervised. And so to me, open the doors wide open, come and have it be no cost. And so that was my question is, goodness, why are we gonna now charge kids for somewhere where we want them to be despite cost? So a couple of answers I found out is this is an accounting issue because if PTAs are kind of collecting money, then that violates privacy laws because they can't know who's on fee waiver. And so there's kind of work, a little bit of this grad party fee is cleanup work as far as, I'm looking at Clark, who's an auditor, just make the numbers a little bit more clean. But then my concern is, yeah, but I still don't want to charge kids for grad parties. Unbeknownst to me, apparently some of our high schools do more of a kind of field trip things where they're going to Lagoon for their senior night, which requires transportation. And so there are some high schools actually doing activities that with that associated cost. My experience in high schools out in my area are always just at the school free of cost. And of course, their sponsors and, I know Granger has a lot of connections to provide food and stuff like that. So to be clear, this graduation party fee schedule item is that schools can spend up to 50, but not necessarily that they have to.
And
because the majority of our schools choose to just house it in the school so that the costs just automatically go down.
Correct.
Did I miss anything in there?
No, I think that you actually talked about each point that I was going to answer if I was able to answer your question. So that was excellent. The one thing that we want you to know is this: all of these fees on this fee schedule are a maximum. There's no expectation that any program spends the maximum. They spend what they need, and they have to create a spend plan to justify it. And so if it was a graduation party was one of those items that they charge, they have to be able to identify a spend plan of what they're spending that money on.
So I have a quick question on that also. So at Cypress, we have gone off location many times for the grad party. So this 50 is the max we could charge even if it's off location. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So this is the grad fee. Basically, if you're going to have a party, no matter where it's at, this is the cost. Max.
Well, that's not totally true because there is an item that I'll show you on here that's a $60 off-campus admission fee. And so that is something that's already been approved, but this was something that was a little bit different that we felt like was important to add. So I guess it is possible that it could be 60, and that would be an item that we could adjust.
Would it be possible the way it's written to be 50 and then the additional 60, like if they go to Lagoon or whatever, that you provide that they can charge the 50 and then on top of that they're responsible for whatever the admission is? Is that, am I clear? I just want to make sure.
Like, would it be 60 total at that point, or would it be 50 plus a $60?
50 plus the fee for
plus the
wherever
fee
you're
for
going.
where they go. Let's say they go to Lagoon.
I would like to actually table that to go back to the fee committee, because now thinking in hindsight, it should be only one fee, and maybe both of those fees should be the same. We either have a graduation activity that could cost up to $60 and or an admission for an outside activity that could be a field trip throughout the year, but they should be consistent. And no, you wouldn't be able to charge both of them.
And I'll just add on, one of the things we had, and Chris, you may remember this when we did it at Cypress, is Salt Lake County used to actually have a grant. I'm not sure they're going to do that post-pandemic. We always kind of do that to subsidize some of the things. And Karen, we always use that as well for kids that couldn't afford it. We kind of use some of those grant fees to pay for students to do, much like you said, we want as many students coming to those grad parties as possible so they have a safe, fun environment on that graduation night.
I wanted to ask, oh yeah, so if we are now collecting the fees for that, is the PTA still in charge of it, or is that now under the administration?
We've kind of done it together, but because we feel like that the way we have ties with the PTA, it's still a school-sponsored event, and so both of them would work together for that. But because we are collecting money and all of the supervision, and it's at the school and or transportation, we feel like that's tied to the school enough that we would charge the fee. Or we could decide, no, let's keep that separate and we're not going to collect any money and it's on PTA. The problem is then the fee waivers that Karen mentioned.
I guess it could really be just like the dances are, which is very collaborative, right?
Yeah.
Between the two.
Very collaborative. The operative concept here, though, is school-sponsored, right? School-sponsored. The students are paying the bookkeeper anyway, previous, but it was going to, and then we were cutting checks to the PTA, and you get the idea, student privacy, things like that. So I would say delineating, in this case by definition, that it is a school-sponsored activity supported by the PTA as we collaborate on this event, right, because of those issues. For example, PTA, we don't rent our buses for transportation, so if they were to go to Lagoon, but PTA is, we're not renting our buses, right? So really it really is a school-sponsored event. Helps us provide that supervision and everything that's been listed, but it's not to the exclusion or sidelining of the PTA whatsoever. It's just operationally, how do we host these events, make sure that we're clean on accounting moving forward, and being able to provide fee waivers for any student that qualifies. And that, to that point earlier, any student, we want all students to participate in these types of things. We don't want something like a student's perception that they couldn't because they couldn't afford it, but they may qualify for fee waivers. This really helps delineate that and clears up the message as well.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I just have a question on the graduation. Will Justins still be able to come and advertise the stuff that they sell, even though, you know, the cap and gown is no longer? Because that's always, Justins have never said $25 for the cap and gown, so people feel like they have to buy this in order to get the cap and gown. And that's one thing that I've not ever been grateful for.
Yeah, so Jocelyn's would still come in and do a presentation. That would change a little bit, though, Connie, in the fact that they'd come in and they'd ask every student to fill out their height and weight, because they match their cap and gown based on that. So they have the proper fitting cap and gown. And then anything above and that would be optional for the student to buy. So it'd just be anything above and beyond the cap and gown would be an optional item for them to purchase. If they wanted to get a bling tassel, or if they wanted to buy a sweatshirt or the class ring, they're certainly available, but they would not be required to buy them. And they wouldn't have to say, this is now linked into getting my cap and gown. Everyone would be required under the basic fee, as we're putting it under, they'd get the cap and gown as part of their basic fee.
So, since all of the students have to pay that $65 and the cap and gown's only for seniors, is there a difference between sophomores and seniors for this?
So that's a good question. The costs of renting a venue for graduation, first of all, we take all of the graduation total amount, and then you as a board have actually paid for half of that cost, and then we've transferred the other half to the individual schools. And so they've been able to pay for that. This will help with that, because then a student that is a freshman, for example, would have paid that 4 times, and then that would pay for their cap and gown. That comes with graduation. However, it helps support those extra costs of the venue and security and all those things involved with the graduation.
Is that in compliance, though? Because we're not supposed to charge extra unless we have for other activities. So how can we justify that?
Because we are going to make sure every kid graduates.
Okay. I like your optimism. So I along the same, since Connie brought it up, I'm just going to bring it up, because that has been a huge theme with several people that have contacted me and said, Jostens, and I was Dr. Bates that I did contact about this before, but that it's not very clear where they check the box just to get the free cap and gown, and that's it. That Jostens does a really good job at masking that, and for those people who are on a fee waiver or something, they don't know how to do that. So Jostens, can we make sure as we go forth that we can get Jostens to make that very clear for those kids who are, and those families that do need that? So I'm just going to put that
We
out.
will. With our new negotiation with them, every student receives as part of being a student at the school, the cap and gown, and so they're going to change their form to make sure that that
Okay.
matches that.
Yeah, that needs to be much clearer for those families and parents.
The other thing too is the board may remember a few years ago, we actually changed to personalized caps and gowns. So each school now has their emblem on them. That was quite an investment. So Jocelyn wants to continue to use those as well with us. And so that would help when we want to continue to work with them on that.
So I have a question. Is there a reason do we have to allow Jostens to come in? I mean, I'm thinking of, maybe some of the kids, everybody gets a free cap and gown, right? But maybe some kids sit next to them, they're ordering this and they've got the money to do so. And then we have kids that maybe don't have that extra money, and all of a sudden it just brings attention to the fact that, okay, you only get a cap and gown because you qualify with, under the new fee. But I don't know, it just brings to light kind of that inequity a bit. Is there a reason we allow Jostens to come in? They're for profit. And I know, maybe Ben, you can chime in. Julie?
If I can add to that too, when you go to those Jostens assemblies, I sit there and just have this pit in my stomach that I'm like, letting these people come in here for free and just market to my kids when we don't allow anybody else to do that. And I've been thinking that, you'd like kids to be able to buy that stuff, but we have high school swag in our school stores. And, why couldn't we just do it through our school stores instead of directly to Jostens? Does that make sense? Or something like that. I just don't like the marketing piece that we allow for this
Doug's
one,
back
but not
here
for the
waving his
others.
hand. But Doug, you have to come speak in a mic because we have online listeners that need to hear you.
I mean, Jostens just has a contract like any other vendor with whom we do, that provides services to the district. So they have to go through that process, the procurement process and everything else. I won't speak to their marketing or the level of marketing, but I think it's important to recognize that they're a vendor that we've vetted, that has a contract with the district and does business just like any other vendor who does business with the district.
Does it get in, how specific is the contract, Doug? Does it get into, down to kind of the line items of, yes, we are allowed to have one assembly per high school for this?
I don't know
the answer?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to pull it.
Because I would love to know the answer to that.
Okay, we can pull a contract.
Because to me, I've been to those, my kids have gone to them and they come home and they tell me about all this stuff, and it's just, some of it's expensive, and I'm wondering, is this really the kids' best use of time to sit through an hour or two assembly, disrupt their classroom seat time? So I think that's another angle to kind of consider too. So Doug, follow up with us once you have that answer.
We could do that. The assembly can always be shorter. Speaking from my principal experience, I was kind of always centered and made it like a senior class meeting as well. So I use that a principal's message along with it as well to kind of get the kids excited, get those seniors excited about graduation, go over any deadlines or opportunities the students had to kind of get them to the finish line as well. So, I think over time, the assemblies used to be very long. I think now they're pretty brief. They've tried to limit them to about a half an hour. And one of the reasons they've tried to do the assemblies, to be quite honest with you, is to try to get all the seniors there, because sometimes trying to communicate that with home with some of our parents has been difficult to access everybody and get them all to fill out the forms. We're still tracking down kids in May to fill out their orders for caps and gowns.
I've debated long when the right time for me to ask this question is. So since it's been brought up that this is really an accounting exercise, maybe this is the right time. And I'm going to try and be as diplomatic as I can, but you also know me to be the blunt person in the room, always. This seems like such an accounting bureaucracy. And we're talking about somewhere between 1.1 and 1.5 or 1.6 million dollars worth of funds. And I get it that the M&O budget is not an endless supply of money. But I think about all the man hours that go into tracking all of these fees and tracking them down and collecting, and your time and efforts to establish these fees. And I wonder if there's not a better way of looking at this, and that it just needs to become something that we fund as a district rather than piecemealing this together $5 at a time. So can you help me understand kind of the logic behind all of this? I know it's more of a conceptual framework question that I'm asking, but I'm very genuine in trying to understand why all of this, because it is such an accounting behemoth to undertake, and it seems a bit unnecessary in my opinion. I realize that there has to be funding, and we're pulling these funds from students, but at the same time, we're tracking which students have fee waivers and which ones can pay and which ones can't, and we're talking about paying for caps and gowns so kids can graduate, and it just, I don't get it.
And realize that our job as a committee is to provide for you the best thinking on what we should charge as a maximum fee for our students, and to develop a spend plan to be able to meet the letter of the law. And so that's really our whole position, is to try to make sure that we're as physically responsible as we can to you as the board, and to our business department, to make sure we have enough funds to continue to function, but to do that within the letter of the law. So that would ultimately be your decision if you were to decide we want to pay for it all.
Can I just have a quick clarifying? The 1.6 million is the fee waiver that we absorb, not all the fees collected.
That's correct.
Correct? We're just talking about.
Yeah, the
okay.
1.1 million was the fee waivers reimbursed.
Okay.
And then the new expense would be the 500,000 for textbooks moving forward.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I want to clarify. So what is the total amount of fees that we're collecting?
I do not know the answer to that one.
I'm writing down notes, and we'll make sure we have that before the second reading to be able to identify. Rick?
Rough math, we're 40-ish fee waiver total. I'll probably get a text with the exact amount here in a minute, but that kind of gives you an idea. 1.6 constitutes 40%.
So maybe on the magnitude of, we're talking about a $5 million budget line
Roughly.
item here to our M&O. If we were to undertake all of it, we're talking about $5 million.
It might be higher than that, only because primarily the majority of our fees that are covered by fee waiver are those curricular fees. And there are some extracurricular and co-curricular fees. But if you were to take into account all of those fees, that could be very different, so.
Yeah, we would specify that outright. So in terms of curricular, co-curricular, yeah, extracurricular, that's a whole nother. So the bill really is focusing on curricular and co-curricular. But for a district, yeah, to be a fee-free district would be, it's not, some districts have gone down that road, particularly those that have higher fee waivers anyway, because they're really not collecting much fees. And it's a nice thing to offer, but it's something that as a district we would have to be able to determine what is the funding source to be able to do that, to help offset some of the costs of
Rick has an answer, looks
the program.
Conceptually, to a nuance to the model you've thrown out here, is an interesting piece. Is we use that number is a number we use for a lot of decision making around free and reduced lunch percentages, both from a federal and a state level. By getting those free and reduced lunch pieces, fee waiver pieces, it helps inform some of our grant decisions, et cetera. So perhaps an unintended consequence of what you're describing would be some adjustments around how we made those decisions as well.
Doug, did you want to chime in?
Actually, you guys did a great job. So unless you have something more, Clark, I'd be happy to talk with you about kind of the history of where a lot of this has come from. There's a fraught history of fees in Utah, and I'd be happy to chat with you more about that.
Well, and I think just to state the obvious, because sometimes people think it, but is, that would be great. If we could be a district without fees, that's great, but we have to realize the back end of that, of what pot of money is that coming out of. We know inflation's high. We know we have, negotiations around the corner with our, all of our groups, and especially among them our GEA, our teacher association. And so I think that we just, we've got to consider all of those, because while we are getting a 6% WPU increase, unfortunately it doesn't ever go as far as we would like it to. We'll just put it that way.
I hear you, and I understand the fiscal implications of what I'm talking about. I'm just genuinely trying to understand, and I realize there's state laws and all of these nuances that come to bear here. But the accounting behemoth that this creates is not lost on me, and I think it's a significant consideration in all of this.
And if I can piggyback on that, one of the concerns I wanted to bring up here is the equity issue. I feel like this is a really great opportunity for inequity to happen in these fee schedules. And if we did something like that, it would fix it, I think. Unless I'm incorrect, I was coming with the question, so I guess I'll ask the question. I feel like there are maybe some schools that charge the full $50 every time. Like, we're just gonna go the full 50. And then there are others who, they're a little more sensitive, and so they try to keep it lower. And the person who you have to really target that at is whoever is your middle income person who's not going to be able to get the fee waiver, and you need that person to be able to pay for it, right? So what I'm suspicious of is that you have some schools that are having nicer uniforms than others. And you have some schools that are having bigger graduation bashes than others. And so I just feel like that's a big concern for me on all of this. And the other thing that I'll just put out there is one of my concerns is that often we get these fees and they just say, this is the fee for the class. And I'm sitting here saying, how could you be needing this much money? And I never get a budget. I never get like, this is where that money's going to. And so I was just gonna ask for a discussion about that.
So I could speak to the spend plans. Is that what you would like to? So what we require now is that each program, if they're going to charge a fee, must create a spend plan that identifies what they're going to spend that money on, and that's posted on the district website. And that's something that we did instill last year. And so for the most part, we had just about every program that charged a fee. So if biology charged a fee, it was for dissection, chemicals, that kind of thing, and they had to identify those items. And you have fundraising is also considered a fee with this new law, and so we have those team fundraisers that helps try to support that so that these parents are not spending that full amount on what these costs are. So you'll see when we get to extracurricular, those costs.
If I can give some feedback on that, what I do is I get an email saying you got to pay your fee, and then I go into the web store and click, yes, I'll pay for all the required fees, and then put my credit card in there. And there's never anything that tells me, oh, you can find this on the web. Or wouldn't it be so great if it said, here is what you're paying, and these are the things. I mean, if you even had that somewhere in the description of the web store, I think parents would really appreciate it, because otherwise it literally, you just feel like these people think I'm a cash cow. You know, you really feel that way as you're paying it. And also the amount of times this year that I've had to go in and pay fees. Now, you know, I'm a person who keeps a pretty strong budget, and like that has gotten out. I don't know what to budget for, you know, like that's not on my radar. And it's gotten so big that it probably was an item, should have been a line item in my budget, because I have 4 high schoolers, so they're expensive.
Yes.
But the point is that it's hard to know in advance those kinds of things, and people could save up for them, and, you know, that, enough said.
Can I ask a question? So how long have we been doing the spend plans?
Just 1 year.
1 year. How did that come in by what they asked and how much they actually spent? Have you evaluated that to see, like biology said they needed this, were they ending up with an excess to carry forward, or did that kind of slow them down and be wise in what they're spending?
It was, because the new fee law does say that you spend, if you're charging a fee, that needs to be spent on the students that it was charged for. In general, prior to this, we do have people who are savers and want to try to save for a rainy day. And so there was exactly what you're saying, Terry, where we were charging maybe that maximum amount, but we weren't spending it all. With these new spend plans, that has to be addressed. And so if they have $10,000 in a budget, that goes into the spend plan also to be saying that we're going to spend that money. It does allow for them to carry over or to plan for as a wrestling coach, I might eventually in 5 years need to buy a new mat. So I can take $1,000 that we're going to fundraise for the next 5 years to help cover that mat. But they have to identify that in the spend plan as well.
Okay. So it has helped.
Yes, it has made a difference. We have several junior highs that are no longer charging fees for certain things because they had a budget, an amount. Okay?
Can I also just make a little kind of feedback comment on group fundraising? I think we looked at the fundraising policy a few years ago, Doug. I'm looking at Doug. The hard thing is about group fundraising is you cannot require it. And so there are some kids that will go and fundraise their little hearts out because that's their only avenue. Maybe they don't qualify for a fee waiver, but also there's not a lot of money at home. They're kind of what we call on the bubble, right? Just outside of that fee waiver qualification, but yet they just don't, have that, that lying around, so to speak. And so the tricky part with group fundraising is while it can be collective and work as a group, you can't require people. So sometimes I've gotten the feedback that sometimes it's only a handful of kids, but because it's a group fundraiser, what they gather is spread out among everybody. And so you can see how challenging that is if there's only 5 kids out there fundraising and it benefits a class of 50 to go on tour, let's say, or something like that. And so I don't really know the answer to how to combat that, but it is a concern when we're saying, oh yeah, just group fundraise as if everybody's out there fundraising as a group. And some of the feedback I've gotten is there's a lot of kids just not willing to fundraise if they don't need to.
And there are and you're completely correct, and that's a lot of our advisors and coaches who have that concern as well. The rule is that we have to provide those fundraisers. They become a fee, and when we do a group fundraiser, they do have to be spread out equally for everybody that's participated, not based on a quota of how many they sold. Now, if they don't participate in that fundraiser, then that's different, and there can be a consequence as far as potential playing time or that type of thing. Now, there is a difference between a group fundraiser and an individual fundraiser, and so we are having many coaches and advisors who are providing an individual fundraiser, which is completely optional, and all of the funds generated by that for one person goes towards their funds to cover their fees. But again, they're not required, they're an optional fee.
But let me just address that really quick, because this one thing that was really good about having Garrett be part of the process of USBE actually developing this rule and then modifying this rule is that was one of the fixes that Garrett requested, demanded, frankly, was that coaches could indeed require participants in an activity to be part of a group fundraiser. Now, with respect to the cost of whatever trip or whatever they're going to be going on, the consequences can't flow as a monetary consequence, but you can require kids to participate and then give them additional consequences or give them some consequences if they don't participate. So there is a means for coaches to require group fundraising and to require a whole team to be involved. And that was Garrett that actually.
And that's a state policy.
Yeah, on a group fundraiser, like if they're required to participate, is there a way to pay for like their part of the participation instead of have to go out and sell something? Because I know that's been sometimes the case of, with my own kids, like they don't have time to go sell the cookie dough or whatever. So
you're going to be eating a lot of cookie dough, Chris.
I had a freezer full once, okay? But so is there a way with that policy that you could still participate but just pay what the team would earn for that part? Because that's been discouraged sometimes, and that's frustrating because.
So with that, because that's my question with that, sorry.
No, it's okay, but
because I've been to some fundraisers
like,
where they, it's a group fundraiser, but you buy a ticket from the certain dancer or student or whatever. Does that count as an individual? And then whatever nobody assigns to a student, it's the group? Does that make sense? Is that?
That's a potential example of an individual fundraiser versus a group fundraiser, but most of them are completely separate. So, for example, I may have a car wash, and I'm asking everybody to participate in that car wash and sell a certain number of tickets. Now, if they don't sell that total amount, but they participated and did their best, they are included in their portion of what was fundraised. And then maybe they have a mini cheer, and the mini cheer is an individual fundraiser, and every person that I get to come to that individual fundraiser all goes towards my fees. So they normally, we try to make them separate. They're a completely separate fundraiser that would be individual versus optional.
And you allow multiple opportunities for the kids to be able to participate. Right. If they can't participate in one, they may be able to participate in another. So there are ways to work that with the coach, with the individual coach, or the individual advisor.
And we've certainly had where students have been asked to sell cookie dough. Some parents have said, I don't want to buy the cookie dough, I just want to make the donation. And we've certainly done that. And then the 100% of the donation goes right to the program as well.
And the coaches usually know this, right? Because that's where kind of the disconnect is sometimes. The school thinks, oh yeah, this is how it works. But the coach is like, no, you need to sell it. And that's where I'm like, well, if I'm going to pay the same amount of money, I don't really need that cookie dough or whatever it is.
Sure. There's going to be a piece that we'll get on this as I go through the next slides that will kind of address that question, I believe, a little bit.
Let me add to that, too, that part of that's changed with the fundraising policy as well, where it used to be they said you had to buy X number of product. That is no longer the case, though, now. So we're no longer beholden to saying we have to buy 1,000 bars of chocolate and sell all these now. That no longer happens. So we can actually, anything we don't sell can go back to the vendor.
Okay, ready to move on?
You want me to move on? So I've almost finished the first blow up of the first senior high schedule.
I know,
feat,
that's why I'm like, all right. We'll hold our questions.
So the very last item is a request for an increase from $20 to $25 for school level banquets with especially senior banquets. It's become very difficult to rent a venue and the amount that it costs for that dinner to be able to find a place that will do that for the $20. So we're asking for that increase to go up to $25. Again, that is generally charged only to family members that come in, and schools usually pay for the students, but that's just something that we're asking for that increase, okay? The next part of this is the curricular course fees. And there are a few changes is all here. The first change is self-paced. This is just a vocabulary word. We have what's called self-paced online versus an actual online school, and the self-paced is where they go through modules, and so we wanted to make sure we clarified that. We also are moving online courses and credit recovery courses down to curricular because they actually fall under curricular where they earn high school credits towards graduation. So we felt like this was a better place versus up in the general fees is where it was previously. And then the final item is workbook licensing fee. Because of that new law, we can no longer charge students for that workbook licensing fee. Okay?
So I emailed Garrett, which obviously didn't help. I want to look at the music ones.
Oh, I missed that.
Sorry. But with us not, so music is now considered a textbook?
Correct.
Sheet music is, yes.
Sheet music is. Sheet music, is that, no, there's a difference between like a book, like a method book. Is that considered a textbook?
Anything that would be instructional based, so anything that's paper printed that we use for instruction would fall under that definition. Now, we do want to make sure we let you know that they've just barely gone through and finished their session. They are having a fee meeting on the 25th where they're going to go through, which Dr. Muse and I will be a part of, where we can ask a lot of these questions. And because this is the first reading, we may have to make some changes in this curricular piece because of what you're asking specifically, because we want to get definitions of what they're considering as textbook and what they're not. Right now, we're making the assumption with that $25 to $15 that probably at least $10 of that has normally gone towards sheet music or books that they use for producing music or vocal music. So,
okay, I guess then that's my question. in relation also to the instrument rental, what would that, I mean, you're saying that they can, as long as they do the spend plan and say, okay, we're gonna take $5 of that every year towards, I assume the non-music performing groups, you're talking about like a piano lab or a guitar class or a ukulele class or whatever. So that can be part of that spend plan though, that they can save part of that toward replacing the instruments, is that
Correct. So the instruments, we can still charge for, the rental fee for that, those types of things, just not textbook or textbook-like material.
Okay, because then the instrument rental fee, does that go to everybody? I just want that clarified. Is that for if you use like piano in class, is that renting the instrument, or is that because it doesn't ever leave the classroom, is that not, you don't pay that instrument rental? Can they still charge that on top of the $15, or is that?
Depending on the instrument, yes, that, for example, what is Garrett? Garrett plays a musical instrument. It's cello. It's a cello. So he rents the cello. Maybe that costs $65, and then on top of that, for taking the class, which would have to create a spend plan for what they would need those items for, they could charge up to $15.
Okay. Do they need to also do a spend plan on the rental? Because to me, I mean, and I understand we want to encourage these kids for the rental to play instruments and everything, but for this, that seems awfully high for a non-performing group, whereas the next one we're going to look at seems very low, in my personal opinion.
So, and I'm just writing notes. So you feel like this one is high where the after school is low?
Well, especially if we're looking at what it's intended to cover. What is that rental intended to cover?
Can I interject? Possibly, I know that musical instruments need a lot of upkeep, and there's the replacement plan. So does that tie in at all to here? Because even though they're a non-performing group, if they're using the instrument in class, every time you use an instrument, there's a little bit of wear and tear on it. And so is part of that fee part of the bigger plan to just maintain the instruments that are within this, even though they're not performing? And I hear what you're saying, and we can look at the next slide of what you're getting to. But, to me, we always say, oh, these instruments are getting old. Well, if we don't have a fee in place, a mechanism to kind of get on some kind of rotation for upkeep, maintenance, and replacement when needed, that's how I kind of view this fee.
I guess I'm just questioning this because I think if it's a non-performing group, then the type of instruments that you're going to get, I mean, I guess you can say the guitars and the ukuleles, can't that be condensed into just one and say up to $50 and just leave it at that instead of a rental fee? Because it is expensive to upkeep these instruments and to replace them, and they should be on a replacement, but I have a hard time not having the ability, like the keyboards, they're not going home with the students, but they're using them in that wear and tear. $15 a year is really not enough to replace those as needed. So can that just be condensed into one? Or is there, I guess I'm just wondering what the reasoning is to take that out, because the instrument rental there, and maybe as a high school principals, you guys can clarify that, but I look at that and think that to me isn't very clear as far as what you get to charge the rental on. If they're using the instrument, it's getting the wear and tear. And that $15, is that really covering that wear and tear that goes through every year and putting them on a replacement? Does that make sense?
Sure. The way it was originally created when we came up with these fees was looking at what each high school charged and finding out what the maximum was for the most expensive instrument. And remember that that's the maximum. And so because there's a different charge for different instruments, that's why we placed the maximum, and then they would have to identify which instrument and what that charge would be. But you're asking, if I'm correct, you're asking, could we not just make this $50, eliminate $75, $15, and the $15 on top, and say there's a $50 maximum charge for all of that and create it in a spend plan? And part of that spend plan could be rentals.
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at the non-performing groups. Now, this is definitely different than the performing groups and what would happen there with that rental, and we'll get to that when we get to that slide. But for this one, I question like I say, it's not very clear to me, like if I were a teacher looking at that, well, okay, do I get to charge that $75 fee for every kid who plays the piano, even though the piano's not going home? Are they technically renting it? But is that $15 then adequate? Because if I can't charge that fee, and depending on which administrator they have and what they say, yes, you can, or no, you can't, then is that $15 adequate to some of that upkeep for those instruments that do stay at school, that don't go home? Or is that enough to help replace it? That's just where my question lies. And maybe that's some feedback that we can solicit from our secondary teachers.
Yeah, and I would say the cool part about what we're doing tonight is this is kind of proposed, and so, our expectation is that when we come and revisit this, that we can maybe have some clarity. And Garrett's not here tonight to maybe offer some of that clarity, or maybe we need to reach out to those secondary teachers and get their feedback on, does this fee make sense to them and why? And if not, why not? Because then as a board, if it makes sense to them, they're the boots on the ground, I'm gonna trust them. But it would be nice to have that overall feedback.
That's just where I hesitate when you're taking that down from the 25 to the 15. I realize that, we're not gonna be purchasing the music any longer, but then let's clarify what that.
Will it cover that fee for piano or something that they don't take home?
Right.
Nope, I wrote that down, and we will find out for you, okay?
I just wanted to know, I'm looking at these, and most of them are things like electives. I mean, I see art there that is not an elective, English clearly not an elective, and science. Like, what would be an English fee cover?
So it could potentially cover, there's a program that identifies whether there's plagiarism. It's called Turnitin. That teachers use, and then they turn in their writings, and it will identify plagiarism. It'll help them grade it based on a rubric, and then they can quickly give students back the feedback on their writing.
Can you pull your mic forward for our online listeners? Awesome.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
So that is the primary fee, and that ranges somewhere between $6 and $10 per student, depending on the contract that we create with purchasing. So that's an example of why we would use that. If they don't use that program, then we would not charge that fee.
Oh, so we aren't required. That's if a teacher wanted to use that.
Correct. All of these fees that have already been pre-approved by the board earlier that are the black letter are only if a teacher would like to charge something and create a spend plan of what they're going to use that money for.
And that's important, Julie, to remember, because these are just maximums. These are absolute maximums. Teachers cannot spend more than that. And even to spend any of that English one from $0 to $10, if they don't have a spend plan behind it with specificity as to what those dollars are being used for, then they're not going to be able to collect the fee.
And for
Sorry, I cut you off, Julie. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask about some of these other classes, but I see what you're saying now, that it's a teacher who wants to enhance their curriculum, and so the way for them to do that is to charge a fee.
Yeah.
And so what we're really doing is empowering teachers, right?
Yes.
To decide if that's worth it to them.
Right. Correct.
So like, for instance, your CTE fee is $40. Some of our food teachers do a lot more food labs than other teachers, and so they may charge a little bit more to cover the cost of those labs. Some may charge a little bit less based on the number of labs they do. Science would be based on if they do any hands-on activities or labs, experiments. They charge a fee for that to cover it.
This is the most they can charge.
This is the maximum they can charge.
There's also a transparency component here that I love, and I think this is at the heart of why the state stepped back and said, look, we've got to revamp our entire school fees program, because what was happening is they were saying how much it cost on the fee schedule. That means the fee waiver only qualifies up to that amount, but then we had some programs going to the side saying, well, kids, it's really 10 extra bucks for XYZ, and then the fee waiver, students don't have that. And so there's also, I love the spend plan behind it, because exactly what you were saying earlier, Julie, is it lets people know, it justifies the reason for the expense. And so I love the transparency angle on these. This is the fee we're collecting, here's the spend plan, and these are how the dollars are being spent.
I would like to, though, propose that where we have these things like science and English, that we make sure that we have an English class, a sophomore English class that somebody can take with no fee. Because whether or not you are on a fee waiver, I mean, I know it's only $10, right? But if you're on the bubble, right, and your only choice now to get that credit is to pay the $10, it just doesn't feel very democratic to me.
With that specific example, usually we have to buy a site license, which equates to every student takes English. And so then you buy that, and that's what they charge you. And so that's only passed on. It's whatever it costs the school is passed on to the student. They don't charge any other English fee for anything else. We don't charge for novels that they read, for textbooks. It would be just that type of a program. Currently.
You see what I'm saying? I mean, like PE, same thing. Do I have to pay? Just because it all adds up. I mean,
Definitely.
now if I have a school where every PE class I have to pay $10 for, and every science class is 15, and every English class is 10, and are these are per semester? It can add
Definitely.
up, and I would like to make sure that we did not have that kind of snafu happen to a family. You know, where suddenly I have to pay $50 extra for each of my kids every semester, so they can get their core required classes, you know?
And that kind of goes back to Clark's question. Do we want to decide to do that as a district, or do we not? So.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is I'm like, okay, now you're tapping into Clark's very question.
Not necessarily, because you could also tell a teacher, you're going to have to do it without the enhanced stuff, whatever it is. But then that goes back to my inequity problem.
Then the empowerment of the teachers goes away, because now you're telling them exactly what to do or to not do, right? So it is a complex.
I agree.
It's very not as simple as maybe we'd like it to be.
There are options also where a teacher can apply for a PTA grant for that, correct? Or they could use land trust as its curricular, right? So there are different options.
There are definitely some options, especially with our current ESSER 2 monies and ESSER 3 monies coming. But that will end eventually as well, so. Can I go on? Okay, so now we're on co-curricular and extracurricular, still at the high school level. And, we wanted to make sure that we recognize that when students do fundraising, it's not always exact what they're going to make. And sometimes you may anticipate as a coach that I'm going to make $10,000 for this cookie dough fundraiser, and it turns out I only make $8,000. And so it's real important that we have in place there that this planned group fundraising may reduce out-of-pocket costs of the activity, but it's not guaranteed. What could happen then is that $2,000 we didn't make would have to be passed on to the 100 kids to be able to cover the cost of the program if we've spent that money. Now, we've told coaches they have some options. That is, I can add an additional fundraiser, but that puts a different hardship on parents and students. But we could offer an additional fundraiser to cover the money that we didn't make, or we could just say, parents, you're going to cover that piece. But that has to be in place in order for us to be able to do that. So that's why we've added that wordage. And then test review prep was just something that was moved. That is ACT prep or that type of thing. And so it is an extracurricular because there's no graduation credit tied to that. So that was just moved, and there was no change as far as the overall fee. This last one is a little bit detailed. This has to do with student overnight travel. And we are requesting to remove the overnight travel and just call it student travel, and then identify the difference between overnight travel and non-overnight travel. First, I want to talk about overnight student travel. That was approved at $12,000 with the current, or 1,200, excuse me. We are asking for that to be increased by $500. And I know that's scary, but I need to explain why. Currently, we've looked at the cost increasing about 40%, and so that equates to around $490. That includes just accommodations in general, not only the cost going up, but also the fact that we are requiring that we have one student in per bed, and so that increased the cost. There's an increased cost in travel, especially with airfare or when we rent those buses when we travel out of state. And then there's also an increase in just overall costs in food for students. So we felt like those increases would help cover that, because right now different groups are having a difficult time in order to reserve enough hotel rooms to be able to do it with that $1,200 price tag. We also, because of that and because of COVID, we've had a few groups who have said it is just a little bit scary to say, I'm going to take a whole bunch of kids to California for a performing arts group, but what if 2 or 3 of them get COVID? And then where are we going to put them? And we've got to probably have a chaperone that watches them in a hotel room, because they're not going to get to go to Disneyland. And are they going to be able to travel back, or are we going to have to provide different accommodations to get them home? Rather than taking that chance, what if we did a in-town tour and didn't do overnight travel? And so what we're saying is that maybe they end up doing they go to give me an example.
They may like do a staycation, but one day they may go to Lagoon and do performances there. Another day they may team up with another high school and do a festival type of arrangement. But they do that over several days. These are kind of their culminating activity.
And with our current rule, the way it was stated, it could not cost more than $65 if they didn't stay overnight. However, in order to meet that rule, then we could say, well, stay at the Best Western in Layton, and that covers the rule. Now you're staying overnight. But why would we do that and have them pay that extra money in this situation? So we felt like it would be a good idea to add a non-overnight student travel, give them a maximum per day and a maximum number of days to be able to do that if they decided to do that, especially our big performing arts groups or those groups that are taking 100 kids or more somewhere. And then the last line removes the word overnight again, just to overall student travel. Questions on that slide?
Just a comment. I know that I've met with some drama teachers, and I know we have some of the assistant superintendents. There are people out there that do not like the administrative decision of one student per bed, because essentially what that does, and I think a big part of this fee increase, is that instead of dividing the cost of a room by 4, you're now only you're dividing it by 2, which obviously makes the room twice as expensive. And there's been some pushback on this, and there's 2 ways to look at it. So whatever side you're on, you think there's the side of, oh my goodness, why would we ever put 2 kids in the same bed? And that can lead to problems. And then there's others that say, yeah, but if you have 1 in each bed, then it could be a he said, she said situation, or he said, she said, she said. So I don't know where the answer is, but just to kind of, that's where a lot of this fee increase is coming, is that decision to the 1 student per bed. So I know some ways that our travel department, people working on setting up these trips, they're looking for rooms with bunk beds. And so you can still have, 4 kids in a room to divide that cost, or looking for hotels that can have a rollaway bed or that have a sofa bed. Once again, it's per bed, right? 1 student per bed. And so just wanted to let everybody know there are ways that we are trying to kind of combat the cost of that decision.
Will you go back 1 slide for me?
Yes.
This is where I just want to push back a little bit on this. So in regards to the instrument rental, I just got some feedback from some teachers, and they said $75 they don't feel is adequate.
Not adequate, you said.
And I did call Summer Hayes actually today. You should be doing a chemical clean of your brass instruments, and a trumpet, which we don't normally rent out, is $80 to do a chemical clean. A French horn, trombone is about $125. A tuba is $225. So if we're doing that every year for a rental, we're not collecting enough to even just do basic maintenance on it. Not to mention it's like $15 to $20 if you have to solder a piece, if you have to unstick a valve or a slide, if you're replacing strings on an instrument, which should happen every 2 to 3 years minimum. You know, that's $200 for a set of bass strings. Cello strings is about $150. So, and then on top of that, if the instrument rental is supposed to just go for regular maintenance on the instrument, I assume that's what the rental fee is supposed to go to.
Correct.
Not for repairs, yes?
Correct.
So if it's just for the rental for just basic maintenance, I mean, they're still getting a really awesome deal. We're talking $75 for the year. Even if that was to increase, that's still a really great deal. But compared to what you could rent it from the store. But they just are feeling like that's not an adequate amount to even cover basic maintenance costs, let alone repair costs. And I know I've talked to Rick about the repair costs and that fund right there, but it just, you know, especially for some of our schools that, you know, it's just, that's just my feedback. I question as to $75 as an adequate amount to cover the basic maintenance of an instrument.
Nicole, would you like me to go back to the committee and then we research that a little bit more to potentially increase these amounts?
Yeah.
Yes.
And they do usually do 20% off of that fee, but still, if you're cleaning a tuba for $225, that's still not even coming close, even 20% off. So.
Okay. Get feedback on those.
I wanted to ask about some sports fees. Do those fees go towards the maintenance of the facility that they're playing in? Is that the major piece? Like baseball fee $1,000, does that help contribute to keeping the baseball diamond in condition?
No, a lot of that is volunteer and or provided by the school. So the district mows the lawn, then mostly the coaches specifically to take care of the infield, all that type of thing. So those fees are not for any type of maintenance.
Okay. And then, but it does pay for us to have coaches.
Part of that fee could include paying of assistant coaches above and beyond what the district pays, yes.
So your teacher is your head coach. Is this correct?
Not always, but sometimes, yes.
And then you have, you know, I guess depending on the sport, how many paid coaches and then a bunch of volunteer.
And that is something that's paid for by the district. We budget line item that through the athletic department. And so each sport gets a head coach, and then many sports receive assistant coaches that are paid for that are not accounted for this. Now, if for some reason...
So coaching fees are not a part of this?
Correct. The only piece that would be included is if they felt like they needed a quarterbacks coach, for example, that they wanted to be able to specialize with kids, they could put that in their spend plan so that parents knew and that they would then charge for a coach. Okay. That happens very seldom.
So it is okay to do that, okay.
And they'd have to write that in their spending plan. So they'd have to write in, this is, part of this fee is to pay for that assistant coach.
But very seldom, what we've seen, that does not happen very often.
I think it will be really telling to look at these and figure out, because I'm sort of like, unless this is going to coaches, I can't even imagine what it is all going to.
Well, and I think an important component here too to realize is over the last couple of years, we have asked coaches to basically document their fees for the last 2 years to even come up. So these numbers, just to realize, they're not being pulled from thin air and they're not guesses. They're actually based on what we've asked our coaches, our drill teachers, our dance, our drama, music. What does it really cost? And realize these are caps, right? So we may have a school, Julie, that only spend, that their fee for baseball may be $150, but maybe some have gone up to $1,000. But once again, those spending plans are critical because you have to justify why you're changing those. So I just wanted to make the point, these numbers aren't coming from, thin air. They're coming from our very teachers who we asked to justify that, to come up with the number of what things really cost. Remember the legislation that passed on this was trying to drill down to what do things really cost and being able to front end that real fee at the beginning of school or at the beginning of each semester so that we don't have this, things are more expensive, we got to charge kids more and more and more, and then you lose the ability to do fee waivers for those kids. And so I think that, I actually appreciate the work that Elise has gone into this so far to get us to, some concrete number starting point.
Well, and I think where I'm going on this is that, for example, I have a kid who plays soccer, and he plays competitive soccer, and I pay $2,000 a year for this, and the kid has they get kind of inexpensive uniforms, and they have these highly qualified coaches that are with them for 3 days a week throughout the entire year. And here I'm paying $500 or $450 for soccer. They give him the most fancy uniform I've ever seen, and they don't keep it. That's why they buy the fancy ones, because they're going to use them year after year. Plus some other things, like they all have their own backpacks, and they all have their own, I can't remember all what else. And then there are other things that they can buy on their own outside of this fee in this web store. And they are practicing 5 days a week. They have soccer 5 days a week. But I'm like, what? I mean, there's a banquet. They give team dinners, but the parents provide them. So I'm like, what is that money going to? My daughter is in softball. We're paying almost that $1,000. And she has like a jersey, but we had to go buy the pants and the socks and everything. So what is that going to?
Shouldn't that be in the spend plan?
These are the questions. So yeah, I'm going to go look at those very carefully. But my point is that I'm sort of saying to myself, are these coaches saying, to make the optimal program, this is how much money I'm going to need? And so I'm going to put that number in? Or is this the plan that could give a pretty good experience for a kid? I had somebody who texted me today who said, my daughter is terrible at golf, and she wanted to join the golf team. She's going to be the worst one there. She's never golfed. And now I have to pay $400 for this when I know she's rarely going to even play. And I have no idea what that's going for, and I have to fundraise, but none of my neighbors have any money either. And I don't know what to do and how to pay for that. And I just think these are really important issues, and I really want to nail in again, I think there is an equity problem here, because say that I am on a football team where they spend the extra money on the quarterback coach, and somebody else is on the football team where they don't, and so now my football experience is honestly lesser, right? So I show up and we aren't in the fancy uniforms and somebody else is, and so I feel like I'm the ragtag team, so I think that it is real, and I think it's not being resolved here. And I don't know how to resolve it.
I just have a question. Is any of this going towards equipment that stays at the school?
Yes.
So year after year, if you're paying, let's say, like my daughter played soccer all 4 years, that $450, it should go to equipment or whatever that stays at the school each time, because I know that's also a problem sometimes, because things get
You're
lost.
correct.
So for instance,
when a coach leaves or whatever, and then they have to rebuy all the equipment. So how do we keep track of, is it in their spend plan, does it say equipment, school property?
Yeah.
Because I know that doesn't always happen at each
Right,
school.
coaches should be putting in their spend plan like an item. So a baseball coach may put in I'm going to buy a new batting cage every 10 years. And so they break that up into 10 equal parts and just charge the students each year for that and kind of budget in that way. So replace that. Some of the big expenses you're seeing, again, these are maximums. And I sat on this committee when we looked at it, and they were all over the place. Some of these ranges were very low and some were very high, but the board established a maximum. So you have to look at it. So all these fees cover uniforms, equipment. It could be anything from bats, balls, gloves, catcher's equipment. It could pay for above and beyond assistant coaches. So for instance, like basketball, you get paid a head coach and 2 assistant coaches. Any coaches above and beyond that is something that the group would have to fundraise to be able to pay those coaches. And then again, those long-term items you'd have to kind of budget in for as well. And this, I sat on this committee when we looked at this, and this was an average. There were some sports that were actually higher than that. Some schools actually went in higher than this, and some were very low, so we kind of just tried to take an average to bring them in. I will tell you right now, if you looked at buying just 2 cheer uniforms, you're well over $1,000 just to buy the 2 base uniforms, just the uniforms alone, without getting any of the extras.
As well as drill. I know those drill outfits, and I mean, it's kind of, I think we're all having a little bit of, it's just a hard pill to swallow when you see those big amounts.
And how much are we just supporting the racket? You know what I mean? Like those drill people, $2,000 for uniforms? Come on, guys.
Well,
There's not many companies out there that have it, so you're right, the companies have a little bit of a monopoly on us.
Yeah, it's totally terrible.
Unfortunately, this conversation, we can only focus on what we can control.
Whatever, I'm starting a drill team. I'm going to sew those suckers.
But you can still control that.
I'm going to have sequins all over me.
Yeah, there you go.
Know it.
And once again, I think my follow-up question is, as we look at these numbers, and some seem high, is, as board members and also just general public, how easy is it to find these spend plans? For example, if I'm my kid's at Granger High, which he is, and I'm saying, okay, I wonder what this particular fee is going to. How would I navigate the website? How would I find and drill down to that spending plan? So at the very least, Julie mentioned this earlier, at the very least I understand where my money is going, what it's used for. How easy is that?
So each school on their home page, on the bottom of their page there's things that show school fees, and you can actually click on that, and any of those plan spends that have been approved by the principal would show up under that school fee plan. And it should break it down into each one and show you line item what those coaches are spending it on.
So I would invite those listening in and board members to spend a little bit of time over the next several weeks to maybe get a little familiar with those, and then if we can, have more questions, reach out to teachers yourselves.
It'll be on the main
parents.
page of each school site. If you kind of scroll down under school fees.
Rich just showed it to me.
And I would say there are links to a spot on our district website where there's some nesting drop-down menus, so you can pick different schools without having to go to each school's website. It just takes you, and you can drill down into each school as you want to choose.
Is there a way to link that from the web store? So, if I'm paying a science fee or a drill fee or a golf fee, is there a way to, maybe we don't list it there because I think that might be a little cumbersome on the website to go through and list every justification for that fee, but is there a link?
If you look at these justifications, though, they're just one line. It wouldn't be too cumbersome to put it right on the website, I don't think.
Either or. I'm fine with either option. Whether we do that there, and if that does become cumbersome, can we link that over? I don't know.
I think it's something we can work on moving forward. In addition, with the new accounting software is also a Focus-based product with the SIS we've just purchased as well. So that's something I think we can work on with Focus as well as we do that.
Okay.
And I'll say the website, you pick the school, but then you can filter by program. So if you want to get to band or basketball or whatever, you don't have to try and search through it. You just pick basketball or band or whatever it is that you want to look at. So trying to make it as accessible as possible, less cumbersome.
Okay, junior high, very similar to the high school. We have added general and eliminated the school program, and we've added the fundraiser with the explanation. So that is pretty much the same. In the curricular course fees, we did add in the self-paced. Now, this is not used very often because we have 6 through 8 now at the junior high. However, there are junior high 8th graders who could choose a world language, which would earn them high school credit. And so that's why we wanted to add that piece in there and remove the workbook licensing fee. And then the next slide, which is number 11, speaks to that planned group fundraising may reduce the cost, but it's not guaranteed, and that we include the overnight travel. Now, overnight travel in the junior high is almost nil. It's very seldom that we ever do that. However, there are certain circumstances where a small group or a group is invited to the Rose Bowl or something unique, and in order for them to be able to participate in that, we have to have this available, but it doesn't happen very often. Oh, one of the things I did want to mention is because it happens so non-often, if you will, we are not including the non-overnight travel because that would just fall under that that admissions fee of the $60 outside of a school activity. And then finally, the proposal.
Actually, on the junior high, why did we lower the basic registration there?
Oh, I didn't mention that. I thank you for catching that for me. I apologize. As you remember, on the high school, we reduced it by $10. The basic registration fee, we felt like that about $10 of that was earmarked towards textbooks.
Oh, yes.
And so then we wanted to do that same, but strange why we had $49. That's just what we used, and we thought, let's take away 9 and make it an even number, 40. Okay, and elementary, one of the things that we wanted to separate, we have a contract with Riverton Music, and we had in the elementary fee under extracurricular band orchestra instruction, and then it was listed as $140. The actual contract with Riverton Music is for $160. So we weren't charging enough to be able to actually cover the contract that we had with them. So we're asking for that increase to meet that contract. We also were lowering instruction below that line so that it separates the difference between instruction and then materials and instrumental rental, which is above and beyond that. Question, Nicole?
I thought we paid that directly to Riverton. Does that really go through the school? Is it put it on there just because fee waiver kids are able to get that?
Correct. They pay directly to Riverton, and we put it on there because we have to be able to pay for those kids that are on fee waiver.
Thank you.
And then we also have that other admissions of off-campus events. What we have had is some of our crossing guard students or other small groups for a reward have been able to go on a Lagoon Day, and without having this fee, it's not allowed. So we wanted to be able to provide that opportunity if we had small groups that they wanted to award. So that was the addition there. So that is the 3 fee schedules. Question?
So that Lagoon Day is for a reward deal, like if they do whole school Lagoon Day?
No, that we do that sometimes at the junior high, but at the elementary level, a lot of times crossing guards, for example. They've worked as a crossing guard all year, and to reward them, we send them to a Lagoon Day.
Oh.
But in order to do that, we cannot if we don't have some kind of a fee schedule set up.
Do we have that in the fee schedule for the junior high somewhere?
Yes, and it's under the exact same line item if I go back.
Other admissions, yes.
Other admissions.
Okay.
And that probably is, and I'm not finding it exactly right now, so I apologize. Yep.
West Valley City sponsors a Lagoon Day for the Safety Patrol kids. It's about 20 to 30 kids from each West Valley school. That's the primary reason for that fee.
So it's
I see it at the top under general on the right.
yeah, just under general, then we have that other admission fee. So that is the first reading. I have several items that I've written down that are questions that we will address and make sure that we can answer for you when we meet at the second reading. And I don't know if we need to wait for Karen and if you want to approve it or if you have any other questions for us.
Wait for Karen while I ask my question.
Okay.
So I did notice on the elementary fee, the other extracurricular and athletic clubs, can you just clarify? Because I know some schools do Girls on the Run. Is that separate from the school?
The Girls on the Run program, that is a separate program.
And it's an after-school program. Schools can choose to work with them through an MOU. Through Doug and JD, they kind of handle some of those agreements. They rent our facilities if and when as necessary.
How are the teachers? Are the teachers who, because there's generally a faculty sponsor to it, right? So are the teachers reimbursed that time through us, or is that through Girls on the Run?
That's all through the private organization.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, we are done and ready for whatever you propose, or if you have any other questions.
All right, Terry.
Do we need to do each of these individually, or can we do them all? I move that we accept the fee schedules as presented in a first reading. All 3, elementary, junior high, and high school.
Now, if we approve these, does that mean that I mean, there will still be changes that can be made as you bring back more feedback, right? It's just
Absolutely.
saying-
The approval is still in draft form until the final action item. Good question. Second, Connie seconds. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table to approve as a first reading the fee schedules for secondary, for high school, junior high, and elementary. Any questions or concerns, board? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, guys. I know there has been a lot of work, and if you'll pass along our thanks, I know from coaches and, you know, drama teachers, choir teachers, drill teachers, all of them, I know that they've had to really drill down to what things actually cost. So pass along our thanks for that, and we'll continue the discussion next month and do some research in between. Yeah, Garrett will do anything to get out of coming. No, just kidding. We wish him well. I hope a speedy recovery with his eye. I don't have any items of business. I was just going to turn to Rich to see if he had anything. But alas, he stepped away. Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I just want to make sure on our calendar, before we meet again, we will have, let's see, when is our April board meeting? April 12th. So because of spring break, bless you. So because of spring break, our April board meeting will not be the first Tuesday of the month. It will be April 12th. Just for those listening in and for those following along, that is our board meeting. Board members, we have our National School Board Association Conference from April 2nd through the 4th. Make sure that's on your calendar as well. Rich, did you have any other things to add before we adjourn?
I do not. Thank you.
All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion to adjourn has been seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thanks, everyone.
We'll have a mass resignation. Where was it? Where was I missing? Oh, right. Yeah. Was there any media there?
Yeah, there was two.
Oh, great. Sometimes you do a release and you don't know if it's going to cover that.
Megan took a picture of me talking to his wife. I told her I'm going to bring that camera.
Everyone's just going to look at you, Larry. I almost called you Larry.
I want you to know we're taking one for the group here. Because hopefully this Spirit United.